If you save my orchard from the bear, cowboy, I promise you, you can marry my prettiest daughter.
If you save my orchard from the bear, I promise you, you can marry my prettiest daughter. The father promised the cowboy, but when the task was done, he laughed, grabbed his obese daughter by the arm, and offered her to the stranger instead. The bear attacked the orchard last night. Hattie ran for her life, heart slamming against her ribs, branches tearing at her dress as she crashed through the dark. She made it to the barn and dropped the bolt with shaking hands. By morning she was standing in her father's yard trying to explain what had happened. "You left the orchard." He didn't even bother getting off his horse. "Papa, it charged straight at me." "That's exactly why you stay there," he said, cutting her off. "The orchard needs guarding. It almost killed me." And? He turned the horse toward the house without looking at her. "Go back." "But it's still out there." "Then deal with it." He rode a few steps before adding over his shoulder, "Useless girl." She stood in the yard and concentrated on breathing, on making herself smaller, on being grateful he kept her at all, even if it was just to guard an orchard from a bear that wanted her dead. At the barn, Tom caught him. "Sir, about that bear." "Don't want to hear it." "It killed Morrison's steers last week. Ripped clean through his fence." Tom kept his voice steady. "Nobody'll take the job. Bear's too dangerous." Her father went still in the saddle. That was what it took, Hattie thought distantly. Not his daughter nearly dying in the dark. Dead cattle belonging to a neighbor. His jaw worked. "Then I'll make them take it." He had his plan by morning. Saturday the town square looked like Christmas and a funeral combined. Hattie wasn't there. She was in the orchard stacking broken branches one by one, trying not to think about last year, about standing on that platform while the whole town watched, about the laughter that had followed her home. That morning she'd heard her sisters through the kitchen window. "At least Papa's not trying to marry that one off again." Viola's laugh had carried clear through the glass. Remember Mr. Henderson's face when he saw her? He left town the very next day. Papa learned his lesson, Nell had added. Keep her in the orchard where she's useful. At least the work burns off what she eats. The words had settled into Hattie's chest like stones. They weren't wrong. Papa had learned. And she was useful here. That was something. Now she was stacking branches while the rest of the town gathered for something she'd never be part of again. On the platform, her father stood with Viola, Dora, and Nell. They looked like they'd stepped out of a painting, perfect and untouchable and completely unaware of what their father had traded for their safety. "Gentlemen." Nathan's voice carried over the whole square. "There's never been an offer like this in our territory." The crowd pressed in close. "My orchard's got a bear problem. Killed Morrison's livestock. Destroyed 20 of my trees. If it's not dead before harvest, I'm finished." Everyone knew about the debt. The whispers started immediately. "So here's what I'm offering." He paused, letting them lean in. "The man who kills that bear gets his pick of my daughters." The square erupted. At the back, Ben elbowed Caleb Turner hard. "Take it." Caleb shook his head. "Don't need a wife. You've been alone 3 years." Ben grinned. "Look at them. You won't find prettier in 3 territories." Viola's eyes found Caleb through the crowd and she smiled slowly, like she'd already made her decision. "Killing a bear?" Ben pushed. "You could do that blind." Caleb looked at the daughters again, at Viola still watching him like the whole thing was already settled. "I'll do it." He stepped forward. "I'll kill your bear." People turned and stared. "Who are you?" Nathan asked. "Caleb Turner." Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. "Don't give daughters to strangers." But Nathan Holloway was desperate and Caleb could see it. The too tight smile, the too wide stance of a man with no other options. "Kill that bear." Nathan's voice dropped to steel. "You get your pick. 2 weeks. Deal." The crowd roared. Next morning Caleb walked into the orchard and found her already up a ladder, basket hooked over one arm, moving like she'd done this 10,000 times. How long have you been working here? She nearly dropped the basket and climbed down fast, cheeks flushed. He was a stranger, tall, with a scar across his jaw like someone had once tried to open him up and quit halfway. Sorry, didn't hear you. She caught her breath. You one of Papa's new hands? No. Caleb Turner. Your father hired me to kill the bear. A silence stretched between them. You work for Nathan Holloway? I don't work for him. She picked up her basket. I'm his daughter. Caleb went still. He didn't mention another daughter. She said nothing. Why weren't you at the square? He was announcing. There was a town meeting? Her voice was carefully neutral. Yes, yesterday he offered one of his daughters to whoever kills the bear. She was quiet a moment. Then I hope you succeed. She started to walk away. Wait. He followed. If you're his daughter, why are you out here alone? Bear came through here recently. Someone has to tend the orchard. Does he know you've been tracking it? She stopped and turned slowly. How did you? Your marks on the trees. Broken branches tied with string. You've been mapping its entry points. Her expression shifted, surprise first, then something careful closing behind it. I told Papa 3 months ago it was getting worse. She kept her voice even. He said I was exaggerating. Were you? She pulled a folded paper from her apron and held it out. A map, hand-drawn, with entry points marked and times noted in neat columns and the den location circled twice. Eastern Ridge, she said. Every 3 nights. Hunts at dusk, never dawn. Caleb stared at the paper and then at her. Why are you showing me this? Because you're going to hunt it. She met his eyes without flinching. And I don't want you getting killed doing it. Your father won't listen to me. A beat of silence. Maybe you will. Something in her voice made his chest go tight. I'll listen. She nodded once. He'll come tonight. Eastern Ridge, just after sunset. If you want to see him, I'll show you where to wait. You're coming? It's my orchard. She said it like it meant something real. All right, tonight then. She walked away carrying her basket of perfect peaches, and Caleb looked down at the map, the detail, the care, 3 months of work done completely alone, and thought about what kind of father sends his daughter to hunt a killer bear by herself. Sunset came orange and low. Hattie found him near the eastern fence. This way. They moved through the trees in silence and she knew every root, every shadow, every branch. There. She pointed to a fallen log. Wait behind that. Wind's right. He won't smell you. Where will you be? Up that tree. I need to see if he's changing patterns. Before he could argue, she was already climbing, fast and certain. They waited as the light bled away. Then movement in the shadows. The bear came through the trees massive and black and scarred, bigger than Caleb had expected. He raised his rifle slow. The bear's head snapped up and caught their scent and charged. Caleb fired and missed. Run! Hattie dropped from the tree. They ran with the bear crashing through the brush behind them, closing fast. They made it to the barn and slammed the door and dropped the bolt. The bear hit the door once, then twice, and the wood splintered but held. Then silence. They sat on the dirt floor with their backs against the wall, breathing like people who had nearly died, because they had. You missed, Hattie said. I know. He's faster than I thought. Yeah. They sat in the dark listening to their own heartbeats slow. You saved my life, Caleb said finally. You saved mine. We're even then. She laughed, small and real, the first unguarded sound he'd heard from her. He looked at her in the near dark and saw the way she'd moved out there. No panic, no hesitation, just fast thinking and faster feet. I'm going to need your help, he said, to kill this bear. I know. Will you help me? She was quiet a long moment. One of my sisters will marry you when this is done. I know that too. And you still want my help? Yes. She nodded once, settled, like it was decided. They sat until dawn came gray through the cracks in the barn wall, and when they finally stepped outside something had changed between them. Quiet and unspoken, the way things do when two people have nearly died together and chosen to stay anyway. For better or worse. The days fell into rhythm. Dawn, Caleb found her already in the orchard. Dusk they tracked the bear. In between, they worked side by side through the long golden hours, and the ease that grew between them felt like something that had always been there, just waiting to be found. She showed him how to read the signs, claw marks on bark, broken branches at the entry points, the particular way the bear moved through the grove favoring his left side. See how deep? She traced a gouge in the trunk with one finger. He's getting bolder. Caleb helped her wrap the damaged branches with strips of cloth. This one might still produce. Maybe. She tied off the knot with practiced hands. Mama always said a wounded tree fights harder to live. The way she said mama, soft, careful, like the words still hurt to speak, made him go still. She plant all this? Every tree. Hattie's hands stilled on the branch. Said an orchard was a promise to the future. He watched her touch the bark gently, like it could feel her. You're keeping that promise? She looked at him then, something raw moving across her face before she turned away. Someone has to. One evening she had a small fire going near the oldest tree, a cast iron pot bubbling sweet and sharp over the coals, and she was stirring slowly, testing the thickness on a wooden spoon with the focused patience of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Smells like summer, he said. She smiled without looking up. Mama's recipe. She said every peach has a story if you know how to listen. What's this one saying? That it's almost ready. She lifted the spoon toward him. Try. He tasted it and closed his eyes. It was extraordinary, not just good but something deeper, like warmth stored up over a whole season. That's incredible. Her smile went wider and real, the kind she didn't give easily. A few evenings later he asked if he could try something, adding a pinch of cinnamon and a small measure of salt while she watched with skeptical eyes. My grandmother swore by it, he said. Said salt brings out the sweet. She tasted it and went completely still. That's perfect. Their eyes met over the pot. She looked away first and went back to stirring, but the air between them had shifted and neither of them said anything about it. Do your sisters cook like this? He asked one afternoon, she on the ladder and him holding it steady below. I don't know. They don't spend much time in the kitchen. She handed down a peach. Viola plays piano. Dora paints. Nell dances. They sound accomplished. They are. Her voice was careful and neutral in the way of someone choosing their words. He took the peach from her hand and their fingers touched briefly. She pulled back fast and reached for another one. He was doing it again, he realized, imagining Viola with Hattie's hands, Hattie's skill, Hattie's quiet competence in everything she touched. The thought should have embarrassed him. Instead it felt like something coming slowly into focus. The town boys came on a Tuesday, 3 of them loud and careless, there to collect peaches Nathan had promised and apparently feeling entitled to more than that. Hattie was working alone, basket heavy on her arm, when the tallest one grinned at her. No wonder Holloway keeps you hidden. She kept picking without looking up. Who'd want to look at that every day? Her face went red and she kept her hands moving and didn't make a sound, and Caleb came around the corner of the grove and saw all of it in one glance. He walked over without hurrying, stood between them and Hattie, and looked at the boy with an expression that required no explanation. Say another word about her and I'll break your jaw. They left fast. Hattie stood with her basket, shaking slightly. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. She turned to go. Caleb. He stopped. Thank you. He nodded once and walked away before she could see his face. She stood there long after he was gone. It struck her slowly that no one had ever done that for her before. She made 3 jars of preserves one evening and wrapped them carefully in cloth. I need to bring these to the house. My sisters asked for them. I'll come with you, he said. I'd like to meet them properly. She hesitated just long enough for him to notice, then agreed. They walked together through the late afternoon light, each carrying a basket, and the easy silence between them felt like something worth protecting. At the house, Viola answered, and her whole face transformed when she saw Caleb, warm and deliberate and practiced. Inside, Dora and Nell materialized instantly, all three of them orbiting him with questions and laughter and careful touches on his arm, asking about the hunt and his ranch and his family. Hattie stood at the edge of the room holding the preserves nobody had acknowledged. "Hattie." Nell glanced at her briefly. "You can go back to the orchard. We'll take care of Mr. Turner." Hattie set the jars down quietly and left without a word. Caleb extracted himself as quickly as he could without being rude and caught up with her halfway back to the orchard, walking fast with her eyes fixed ahead. "They didn't even thank you for the preserves." "They don't have to. We're family." "Hattie." "They took me in when Mama died. She kept walking. Fed me. Gave me a home. I owe them everything. They treat you like a servant." She stopped and turned, and her face was carefully composed. "Maybe that's what I am. You're his daughter. You're... Please." Her voice cracked just slightly. "Don't." She walked away faster, and he let her go, standing there in the fading light, understanding something that she couldn't see yet, that whatever cage they'd built around her, she'd lived inside it so long she'd learned to call it kindness. A few days later they were tracking at dusk when the bear appeared without warning, closer than either of them expected, and charged before Caleb could position properly. He fired and hit the shoulder. The bear kept coming. They ran for the barn again, the bear crashing through brush behind them, and made it inside and slammed the door and dropped the bolt, and the bear hit it once, twice, 3 times, the wood groaning and splintering but holding. Then silence. They stood with their backs against the door, Hattie's shoulders pressed against the planks and Caleb's hands braced on either side of her, both of them breathing hard, faces close in the near dark. The bear moved away through the brush, heavy footsteps fading. Neither of them moved for a long moment. He stepped back first. That was close. She nodded and couldn't speak, and the awareness of how close, of everything, stayed in the air between them long after the danger had gone. The second week began with pressure building like weather before a storm. Harvest was days away. The bear was still alive. They tracked more aggressively now, spending long hours moving through the grove together, and in the quiet moments between, fixing fences, grafting damaged branches, sitting by the fire as the stars came out, neither of them spoke about what was growing between them. But both of them felt it. One evening she told him about her mother without him asking. She planted every tree here with her own hands. Hattie was looking at the oldest tree at the center of the grove, her voice soft. Said this orchard was her legacy. Something that would outlast her. After she died, I promised I'd keep it alive. Caleb looked at the rows of trees stretching into the dark, heavy with fruit, tended and loved and thriving. You've done more than that. You've made it thrive. She turned to look at him and her eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. Thank you for saying that. Neither of them looked away this time. They were tracking near the ravine 2 days later when the ground gave way without warning. Hattie went down hard, her head hitting rock, and didn't get up. He was beside her before she stopped moving, his hands finding her face, the blood already dark in her hair. He carried her back to the barn and laid her on the hay and cleaned the wound carefully with water from the rain barrel, and she woke at sunset already feverish, her eyes unfocused. He sent Tom to the house immediately. Tell them Hattie's hurt. Tell them to come. Tom came back an hour later. I told them. What did they say? Mrs. Holloway said she's sure Miss Hattie will be fine. She's strong. Caleb stayed beside her for 2 days, changing the bandage and bringing water and watching her sleep through the fever, and nobody came. Not her father. Not her stepmother. Not one of her sisters. The fury built in him slowly and quietly, the way serious things do. When she finally woke clear-headed on the 3rd morning, she looked around the empty barn and asked quietly, "Did anyone come?" He said nothing for a moment. Tom told them the first day. She nodded slowly and looked at her hands. They're probably busy with harvest preparations. He still said nothing. But he understood now with complete clarity what he was looking at. Not a family that was imperfect or distracted or complicated, but people who simply did not care whether she lived or died, as long as the orchard kept producing. She was back picking peaches within days, still moving carefully from the injury, and Caleb watched her and felt something fierce and protective settle permanently in his chest. The sisters arrived midweek with parasols and pretty dresses, Nell and Dora wandering through the grove picking fruit and dropping half-eaten peaches in the grass while Hattie worked around them in silence. Viola went to the barn. Caleb was checking traps when she appeared in the doorway, her voice warm as firelight. Mr. Turner. Turned. Miss Viola. She came closer, too close, and took his hand before he could step back, turning it over to look at the bruises from the bear encounters. You're hurt. It's nothing. She didn't let go and traced the bruises slowly with one finger. You're so brave. Risking yourself like this. He pulled his hand back. Miss Viola, We're going to be married soon. She leaned in, her voice dropping. Everyone knows you'll choose me. There's no need to be so formal. Movement in the doorway. Hattie stood there with a basket, having come to bring them lunch. She saw Viola's hand on Caleb and the closeness between them. Her face went white. She turned without a sound and walked away. Hattie, Caleb started after her. Viola caught his arm. Let her go. She was just bringing something. He pulled free and followed. Behind him, Viola emerged from the barn smoothing her dress. Dora looked at her sharply. Viola, control yourself. If father saw you in there alone. What about Hattie? Nell cut in, watching Caleb disappear into the trees. She's always with him. Viola smiled. Papa doesn't see Hattie as a woman. None of us do. They laughed. Behind the trees, Hattie heard every word and kept walking with her vision blurring and her chest cracking open along a fault line that had been there her whole life. She finally understood that she had been foolish to think anything had changed. After that day she was different. She still showed up at dawn. Still tracked the bear with him, still pointed out the signs, still did everything the hunt required. But the warmth was gone, replaced by a careful professional distance that felt to Caleb like standing outside a house he'd lived in and finding the door locked. Hattie, what's wrong? Nothing. I've been busy. Talk to me. You should focus on the hunt. You're almost out of time. I don't care about the hunt right now. Well, you should. She kept walking. One of my sisters is waiting for you. He stood there watching her go and didn't understand, only knew that something had broken and he couldn't find the place to begin fixing it. At night she sat alone in the orchard and told herself the things she needed to believe. Of course he wants Viola. Everyone does. I was stupid to think he saw me differently. He's kind to everyone. It didn't mean anything special. He'll choose her when this is done and I'll still be here. Alone. She built the walls back carefully, the way she'd learned to do, stone by stone in the dark. On the last morning before harvest, they tracked the bear to his den at dawn and worked together in total silence, and despite everything they moved in perfect synchrony. She signaled left and he went right, she drew the bear's attention and he positioned, 2 weeks of shared knowledge operating like a single instinct. The bear charged. Caleb fired and hit the shoulder, but the bear kept coming, wounded and furious, and turned toward Hattie. Caleb tackled her hard, taking them both to the ground, and fired again from where he lay, and the bear stumbled and collapsed and was still. They lay in the dirt covered in mud, breathing hard, his face inches from hers. You saved my life, he said. You saved mine. He was going to kiss her. She could see it in his eyes, and for one long second she wanted him to, wanted it with an ache that surprised her with its force. Then she pulled away and stood and brushed the dirt from her apron. We should tell Papa. The moment shattered. He stayed on the ground and watched her walk away and felt the ache of it settle somewhere deep, and understood that the bear was dead and the hunt was over, and tomorrow he would stand in that town square and choose a bride, and none of it felt the way he had imagined it would. Word spread through town before noon. By the time Caleb reached the square, it was already packed. People pressed in from every direction, and the noise hit him like a wall. Cheering, celebration, the particular excitement of a crowd that had been waiting for something to happen. He brought the bear's claw as proof, and the crowd erupted when he held it up. Nathan stood on the platform with Viola, Dora, and Nell arranged behind him, all three dressed in their finest, faces bright with anticipation. Viola had positioned herself at the front and was watching Caleb with the calm certainty of someone who already knew how this ended. Mr. Turner has done what no man in this territory could do. Nathan's voice rang across the square. He killed the bear that was destroying my livelihood, that no hired hunter would touch. According to our agreement, he may now choose one of my daughters. The crowd cheered. Viola stepped forward smiling, and the crowd murmured its approval. Then the town elder stepped up beside Nathan and spoke quietly, but not quietly enough. A word, Holloway. About Turner's circumstances. His ranch is small. Not what we assumed. Surely your most accomplished daughter deserves better. Nathan's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. He stood very still for a moment, calculating. Then he turned back to the crowd. Mr. Turner. His voice was smooth as river rock. You've earned your reward. One of my daughters, as promised. He looked past Viola, past Dora and Nell. His eyes found the edge of the crowd. Hattie. Come here. The square went quiet. She was at the very back, there only because Tom had told her she was expected. She heard her name and froze, then walked forward through the crowd that parted around her, every eye following, her face already burning. She knew before she reached the platform that something terrible was about to happen. She had felt this before, last year, a different humiliation, the same audience, and the knowledge sat in her chest like a stone. Nathan grabbed her arm when she reached him and pulled her forward to face the crowd. I said one of my daughters. He paused, letting the silence stretch, and grinned with a showman's timing. I never specified which. He pushed her toward Caleb. Here's your bride, Turner. The square exploded. Laughter, gasps, cruel jokes rippling outward. He's giving him the fat one. Poor bastard thought he'd get Viola. And Hattie stood at the center of it with her face white and her vision narrowing and the sound washing over her like something cold. Viola looked relieved, already glancing toward a wealthy rancher at the edge of the platform. Dora and Nell pressed their hands over their mouths, shoulders shaking. Nathan leaned close to Caleb, voice dropping beneath the crowd noise. Be grateful you're getting anything at all, stranger. Kept my word. One of my daughters. His smile was a blade. Take her or walk away and show everyone exactly what you are. Caleb looked at Hattie. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Tears moved silently down her face, and she was holding herself very still in the particular way of someone who has learned that falling apart in public costs more than it's worth. He could refuse. He had every right. But he looked at her. This woman who had tracked a bear alone for 3 months, who had kept her dead mother's orchard alive with her bare hands, who had never once asked anyone for anything, and he could not make himself be one more person who walked away from her. I accept. Hattie's legs nearly gave out. The ride to his ranch was silent as a held breath. She sat in the wagon staring at nothing, and he tried once, Hattie, and she didn't respond, and he stopped trying, and they rode through the dark with the laughter of the town still ringing somewhere behind them. At the ranch he showed her a room. She said, thank you, in a voice he didn't recognize, and when he started to speak she said, good night, Caleb, and closed the door. He stood outside with his hands at his sides and no words that could reach her. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way of something gone wrong beneath the surface. She cooked and cleaned and tended the small garden, and he was kind and kept his distance and slept in the barn most nights. At meals they were polite in the manner of strangers who share a space and nothing else. She told herself she already knew the shape of this. He had wanted Viola and gotten her instead, And she was his obligation now, the joke that had become a marriage. She had believed worse things about herself for longer. She knew how to carry it. He stood on the porch at night and stared at the stars, trying to understand why having her here felt emptier than being alone. Why he kept thinking about the orchard, the fire, the preserves, her laugh, with an ache he couldn't name. Ben arrived on a Tuesday, congratulations already forming on his lips that died the moment he walked through the door and felt the temperature of the place. Caleb told him everything. Ben listened with his face going darker the further the story went. Viola's been busy, Ben said when he finished. 3 wealthy ranchers competing for her already. She laughed about you at the mercantile, said you got stuck with the fat sister, said it like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. Caleb's jaw tightened. But that's not what I came to say. Ben leaned forward. You're miserable, Caleb. Not because of what happened in that square. Because the woman you actually want is in that house and you're sleeping in the barn. He left before Caleb could argue. Caleb sat on the porch a long time after the sound of Ben's horse faded. He thought about the orchard. The way she moved through the trees like she was part of them. The morning she handed him the map without hesitation because she didn't want him getting killed. He had come to this town looking for a beautiful wife and found instead a woman who kept a dead woman's orchard alive through sheer will and love. And he had been so busy looking at Viola that he had nearly missed her entirely. He went to her room that evening with everything he should have said weeks ago ready in his chest. He knocked. No answer. He opened the door. The room was empty. The bed was made with care. Her few belongings were gone. A note on the pillow in her handwriting. I don't belong here. I'm sorry. Hattie. He was out the door and running before he finished reading it. She had walked through the night. The orchard found her at sunrise the way home always does. The smell of it first, earth and ripeness, and then the trees emerging from the early light familiar as her own hands. She stood at the edge of the grove and breathed for the first time in weeks. Nathan came out an hour later and found her picking peaches, basket over her arm, like she'd never left. You came back. He smiled with a satisfaction that had nothing warm in it. But harvest won't wait. This is where you belong, Hattie. She nodded and kept picking and told herself this was enough. Almost believed it. Caleb was saddling his horse the next morning, frantic and sleepless, when the lawyer rode up the path. I'm looking for Miss Hattie Holloway. I need her signature on some documents. She's not here. What documents? The lawyer handed them over with the reluctant look of a man who knows more than he's saying. Caleb read them in the yard and felt the blood drain from his face. Property transfer papers, Hattie gifting the orchard to Nathan and his wife. But attached beneath them was the original deed. May Holloway, sole owner, registered 1855, never transferred after her death. He read it twice and understood everything. Why Nathan had kept her there her whole life. Why they had never let her build anything elsewhere, never let her know her own value. They had needed her labor and needed her ignorant, and they had achieved both by making her believe she was a burden they were generous enough to keep. She had spent her entire life working her own land as though she owed someone for the privilege of existing on it. She doesn't know, does she? Caleb said. It wasn't a question. The lawyer shifted in his saddle. That's a family matter, sir. Caleb folded the documents inside his coat and rode hard for the orchard. He found her alone among the trees at sunset and she turned when she heard hoofbeats and went very still. Caleb, why are you here? He put the documents in her hands. Your father is trying to steal your land. She looked at the papers. What? This orchard belonged to your mother. When she died it passed to you. It has always been legally yours and he has known that your entire life. She stared at the deed. May Holloway, 1855. She read her mother's name 3 times. He told me I was a burden, she said quietly. He said keeping me was an act of kindness. I know. I believed him. I know that too. She stood among her mother's trees with the documents shaking in her hands and felt something in her chest that had been load-bearing for 25 years begin, slowly, to give way. He called the town meeting for the next morning and she couldn't stop him. She stood at the edge of the crowd while Caleb held up the documents from the same platform where her father had humiliated her and told them everything. The crowd that had laughed at her stood in silence now. Nathan tried to speak. The lawyer confirmed the deed. The town turned on Nathan with the particular shame of people recognizing their own complicity, and his face went through red and purple and finally a defeated gray. Men began approaching Hattie from the edges of the crowd, suddenly respectful, suddenly interested, and she understood exactly what had changed in their eyes and felt sick with the clarity of it. Caleb found her at the edge of the square and took her hands. "You don't have to choose me. The orchard is yours. Nothing can change that. You have real choices now, maybe for the first time." He held her gaze. "If you want to run it alone, I'll help you start. If you want to leave entirely, I'll help you go. But if you want me, I'm yours. Not because of any agreement or any trick. Just because I want to be." Nathan pushed through the crowd. "He's lying. He wants the land, not you." She turned and looked at her father, and the fear she had always felt in his presence was simply gone, replaced by something clear and cold and final. "You told me I was a burden. You worked me into the ground on my own land and laughed when they humiliated me." Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "I won't sign your papers. And I won't spend one more day believing what you told me about myself." Nathan grabbed for her arm and Caleb stepped between them without a word. Nathan looked at his face and let go. They left, Nathan, his wife, all 3 daughters, moving through the parting crowd in furious silence while the town watched and said nothing. The square emptied until it was just the 2 of them in the late afternoon light. "You gave up Viola for me," she said. "I never wanted Viola. I wanted you. I was just too blind to see it until it was almost too late." "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Choose. I've never been allowed to choose anything." "Then don't choose today. I'll be here." "I choose both," she said. "The orchard and you." He pulled her close and kissed her, and she felt the weeks of pain dissolving, and when they broke apart she was crying and she didn't mind. "I love you," he said. "I think I have since the morning you handed me that map." She laughed through her tears. "I love you too. Even when I was certain you wanted my sister. Especially then. Because you were kind to me anyway." Weeks later, the orchard was loud with harvest, workers moving through the rows in the long golden light. Hattie sorted peaches at the base of her mother's tree while Caleb worked the high branches, and when he climbed down he handed her one perfect peach without ceremony, because it was hers. She took a bite and offered it back. They sat together against the broad trunk, his arm around her and her head on his shoulder, and the evening came in slowly over the hills. She was home. She was free. She had been chosen, and she had chosen herself first, and those 2 things were not in conflict anymore.